Everybody, thank you for sparing the time to either attend the meeting to find out a little bit more about Launchpad, or to watch this recording if you weren't able to make the session, or maybe you weren't able to but your colleague was. My name's Kirsty Page and I'm the person that's pulled Launchpad together, and I'm working with Newcastle Authority and also other local authorities in the North of Tyne Combined Authority area to really begin to look at getting Launchpad out to as many schools and settings as possible so that we can support particularly our most vulnerable children. So the idea of this session is I just try and tell you a little bit more about it, what it can do for you and your children and how you might work towards using it. And it might be that you've already made a decision that you want to come on board, which is fabulous. And you're here just to find out a little bit more information. Or it might be that you're undecided, or you just want to find out a bit more before you make the decision about coming on board or not, as the case may be. And that's fine too. So let's kind of start with the kind of most important message really about Launchpad, in that I call Launchpad a toolkit. It's a toolkit to support you and your team and your practice. It is very much not an intervention program. So lots of you will have heard of things like ICANN Early Talk Boost and things like that, where you have a set of activities where you take a group of children and 3 times a week you deliver these session plans, these sets of activities to that group of children. Launchpad is not like that at all. It's all about your understanding of your children, your understanding of their development and the gaps that they have, and then using that understanding to really look closely at your practice. And I'll try to unpick that a little bit this afternoon. So I think the first thing that Launchpad would do if you came on board or decided to come on board is that it is a process. Having the toolkit and using the toolkit is a long-term sustainable process for upskilling you and your team. So it's almost like CPD as well as practical ideas at the same time. So we don't just say do this, do that with the children. You don't understand why, but just do it anyway. It's about let's work together to understand your children more and the gaps that they have more. And then we'll have a look at what we do with those children in more detail. And you know what? That upskilling journey will be something that if you embrace Launchpad, will take you through 2-3 years as you get new people in, then you can kind of use it to upskill those. You know, so it's really important that this is about CPD and long-term upskilling for yourselves as leaders, but also for your team. And the main thing it upskills you with is child development. And of course, as early years practitioners, you all know a lot about child development already, but what it does is it allows you to really understand the very specific nature of child development, lots and lots of different skills, but also within the development of those skills, the very specific incremental way those skills progress over time and as a child moves on with their development. What it will particularly upskill you and your teams with will be a greater and more thorough understanding of speech, language and communication development. I didn't say at the beginning, but my first and main background is as a speech and language therapist, and then in later years as a teacher as well. And what I'm trying to do with Launchpad is to give you a level of understanding and a level of skill and a level of thinking that you would have as a speech and language therapist whilst you're working as people leading within early years settings. And we'll talk about that a little bit more over the next few slides. So by having this understanding, what would that give you as your team? Well, beyond having just greater CPD and understanding about child development, the Launchpad toolkit really comes into its own, I suppose, and where schools and settings use it the most is to support those children who are not meeting age-related expectations. And some of those children you might be really concerned about, and some of those children you're aware they're not meeting age-related expectations, but they're not necessarily significant concerns, but you're still wanting to work those children towards age-related expectations. And what Launchpad gives you is the ability to say, right, okay, I know this child isn't meeting age-related expectations already. Where are the gaps? And what is the main gap for this child? So it really allows you to move away from that very broad, general, oh, they're not meeting age-related expectations, to say, yes, but exactly what is the main gap for this child and what is it that we need to work on? And once we've identified gaps, again, it's not about saying, oh, they've got a gap with auditory memory for understanding, the ability to understand sentences, or oh, they've got a gap with vocabulary, you know, oh, they can't do this, they can't do that. It's really not about that at all. It's about identifying they've got a gap with this skill, but also they can't do what they're supposed to do for age-related expectations. But let's go back and let's find out within that incremental structure of child development with that skill, let me find out what can that child do? How far back do I have to go before I get a yes, the child can do that? And I talk about that within the toolkit a lot as a child's level of success. I've identified that they're not meeting age-related expectations. I've identified the gap, but then straight away, I want to focus on within that skill, what can the child do? And then from that level of success, what would be their next step? So if I want to move the child on and there is a gap between their stage of development and their age, then I need to understand that step-by-step incremental process that will be involved in closing that gap and moving the child towards age-related expectations. And Launchpad helps you to do that. So, of course, this ability to identify gaps, establish what children can do, and to set next steps for them would be particularly supportive for your children with more specific and significant needs, and would greatly support, the toolkit would greatly support, whether it be yourselves or a colleague who have the role of SENDCO within your setting. So that we can make sure that we really identify these children as quickly as possible, but really get a clear idea about what these children need and set those really incremental small steps of progress so that we can ensure that we're giving these children what they need and we're ensuring kind of progression. And where children do need more support over the longer term, maybe you are working towards referring children to other people or EHCP applications and things like that, then the Launchpad toolkit would really support you with all of that process. And within those children who have more specific and significant needs, some of those children's primary areas of difficulty will be speech, language and communication development. But you will also have a lot of your children, or a lot of children, and maybe even a lot of your children in your setting where they are not meeting age-related expectations with speech, language and communication development. but it doesn't necessarily mean that they've got more significant and entrenched developmental needs. So there is that kind of application to support us with those children who we're recognising as SEND issues, but it will also really support us with those children whose main skill gaps lie within that developmental area of speech, language and communication development. And it's those children that really the toolkit can really support us to identify and close those gaps as quickly as possible, because we know that if those gaps are left unidentified and unaddressed, that longer term for those children, that doesn't just cause massive issues with their learning and attainment in education. It also affects their social skills and their kind of socio kind of outcomes longer term. So I think the important thing is to remember, when you're taking on something new, it's like, wow, if you're anything like other people I know, you will all be like super busy and you'll already probably feel like up to here on a day-to-day basis anyway. And so the thought of taking on something new can be quite exciting, but it can also be quite daunting. And sometimes you can kind of think, oh my goodness me, not another thing. And what I really want to kind of state is that Launchpad really fits in with where you are at the minute as settings at the minute. And also it really, really fits in with the EYFS framework as well. So when we're thinking about children who we're identifying as having SEND needs, or when we're thinking about those children who our main priority is that they're not meeting age-related expectations with speech, language and communication, the important thing to remember is that we know these children already in our settings, and we're maybe picking them up because of our existing knowledge of child development. We might be picking them up by using things like the observation checkpoints in Development Matters, or by some other kind of way of kind of asking ourselves questions about these children. But again, within the EYFS, we're being asked already to identify who these children are. And we know that those children who are not meeting age-related expectations with speech, language and communication development, they will flag themselves up within different areas of the curriculum, should I say. You know, the most obvious one would be communication and language, but it's important to acknowledge that for many children who are at earlier starting points with personal, social and emotional development, the vast majority of the children, their PSED will be affected by their speech, language and communication skill gaps. So although speech, language and communication does correlate with communication and language development and the curriculum in that area, a speech, language and communication skill gap affects children much more broadly, as much in PSED as it does in communication and language, and also affects them across the curriculum in other areas, early mathematics, for example, knowledge and understanding of the world. And, you know, away from the curriculum, I think we often spot these children and we often have concerns about these children because, you know, learning aside, we notice that the way they interact with us, the way that they play, the way that they utilize and move about our learning environment can be different from what we would expect it to be. So the EYFS already says identify those children, which we've discussed, but also what are we doing to ensure that these children are working towards age-related expectations, and also ensure that we're identifying and supporting children with more specific and significant needs as soon as possible. So this is what the EYFS is asking us to do. And I suppose what I'm coming in with is this notion that Launchpad would just really help you to do that. but so that Launchpad is helping you to do something that you're wanting to and needing to do anyway and are doing already, but that Launchpad would just help you that little bit more and to move you on from your current starting point as a setting to really understand these children and what they need at a slightly higher level. So whether we're thinking about children with more specific and significant needs, or whether we're thinking just about those children who are not meeting age-related expectations with speech, language and communication development, what will Launchpad support us with within that current agenda that we're dealing with and working on already? I think the biggest thing that Launchpad will do is it will help you to understand those children a lot better. So if a child is not meeting age-related expectations, if they're not using as many words as their peers, if they're not speaking as much or in as long sentences as their peers, Launchpad would allow you to stop the bus and say, why? You know, speech, language and communication is a big area of development. And what I need to say is, right, okay, I've got lots of different children who are not meeting age-related expectations, and they're all individual. The reason why one child is not meeting age-related expectations might be very different from the reason why another child isn't. So I need to move away from just seeing those children as not meeting age-related expectations to begin to say, let's drill down a bit here. Let's find out why. And in the area of speech, language and communication, let's use the toolkit to establish what is the main speech, language and communication skill gap that is acting as a barrier to this child learning and to this child interacting and communicating at the level we would be expecting them to. And then once we've identified what that main skill gap is, and once we've kind of gone back and said, sorry, that is somebody trying to phone me. I will try and get back to my PowerPoint. Am I still on the PowerPoint, Beth? I can now see you. Right, okay, thank you very much. That is really useful. Let me try and get it back on my screen. So sorry about that. Once we've identified what is the main barrier, what is the main skill gap, and we've done that drilling down and we've established what the child can do within that main gap and what would they need to do next, that next step gives us an idea about, okay, we've moved from knowing the child is not meeting age-related expectations to having a greater understanding of why, a greater understanding of what the main skill gap is, and more to the point, a greater kind of informed idea about, like, okay, what do we need to work on and what do we need to do to move this child on? And of course, as that child makes progress, Launchpad would allow you to then say, all right, okay, they've made progress, they can do that now. Right, okay, what would we do next and what would we do next? So it's like an ongoing process of moving what you do on as the child themselves moves on. So once you've got an idea about what you need to work on, Launchpad is definitely not about, okay, take that child to one side, take them out the setting and do something different and separate with them, or take that group of children out into the cloakroom and do something completely different and separate with those children. Really, Launchpad is about saying, I've got a greater sense of what my children's gaps are, I've got a greater sense of what they need, and now I'm going to weave those targets into my early years practice. And I'm also going to, by doing so, have this idea that I can embed interventions into my daily practice, into my learning environment, into my daily routines, and that really what we're trying to do is flip the notion of what an intervention is, that an intervention does not have to involve taking a child out and doing something separate and different, that the most valuable interventions are those that we can weave in to what we do already. And when we have a greater understanding about what children need, of course, the Launchpad toolkit will give you CPD and ideas of how to work on children's next steps. But I think it's always really important to, when you've got an idea about what a child needs, to really start the ball rolling with saying, before I look at the CPD or before I look for other ideas, let's kind of think about what we do to work on that already. So what we want to do is really keep our current practice that's good and strong, and then tweak it and add to it as needed. Launchpad isn't about coming in and changing everything that you do, or don't do that, do it the Launchpad way. It's not that at all. It's about kind of saying, understand your children, audit and have a think about and chat about your current practice, and only then begin to think, oh, well, what might we need to do more of? Where might we need to go back a bit more with some children because we've moved on a little bit too quickly? And where might we need to work on a specific skill for an individual child? Or where do we maybe need to work a bit more on a certain skill? Because when we think about it, we don't work on that as much as we think we do. So again, it's taking your team, and it's taking your setting, and it's taking your practice from your current starting points, but it's also about embracing what is good already and keeping what is good already, and then just tweaking and adding to that and evolving it to meet the needs of your children as you begin to understand their gaps and their needs a little bit more. So when it comes to working on those kind of next steps, when you kind of have that sense of, right, what does this child need us to work on? I always think in early years we can work on things within what I would call 3 layers of our practice. And if you come on board, over the next few months, we will have 3 kind of CPD sessions, not close together, but relatively quickly, where we will talk you and walk you through the thought process of weaving a higher level of a skill-based approach and embedding intervention into the 3 layers of your practice. And the first one that we will talk about at the start of October is the most fundamental layer of our practice, which will be our interactions that we have with children. And that could be the interactions that we have in child-initiated learning. It could be the interactions that we have within our daily routines, or it could be the interactions that we have, particularly as children get a bit older, with groups of children as we share stories and songs and rhymes. And as I begin to understand more about my children's gaps and next steps, what strategies do I need to use within my interactions as I and other members of my team interact with that child? How might I need to position myself? How much should I say or not say? Which words do I want to particularly add and focus on? Are there any particular words or sentence structures that I want to model kind of very specifically in a targeted, repetitive way to help move that child onto the next step? So again, if you are somebody coming into your setting and they're saying, oh, does this setting do Launchpad? Well, if they see the poster, the skills framework on the wall, which I'll talk about in a bit, they might say, oh, yeah, they're doing Launchpad. But if I looked at you working with the children, The way that I would see that you were using Launchpad would be because I would see high quality interactions, and most importantly, I would see adults interacting with children in a differentiated way, so that the strategies that they use were really targeted to fit with that child's skill gaps and to support that child to move on to the next steps. And as the child made progress, those interaction strategies would evolve and change as the child began to make progress. The second training session and the second layer of practice, which is really useful to consider, and it's useful with your team to just think about these one at a time so that you don't kind of try and take on too much too soon, is that how can we use our learning environment in a really targeted way to build the skills that we're wanting to build with our children. So it might be that there are certain skills like building turn-taking skills or building listening skills or building verb vocabulary that you're working on already anyway. Even if you're not necessarily specifically thinking about working on those, you will be doing lots of different things as you access different learning environments with children, different areas, and as you use different resources, you will be building lots of these skills already. But where Launchpad comes in is it says, right, we've got an increasing awareness that quite a large number of our children need to work more on this skill. It's not just one child, quite a lot of children need to work on this skill and these skill steps. So how can we weave that and do a lot more on that skill by utilising our learning environment in a targeted way? Or it might be that I've only got one child who needs to work on one thing, but still with that individual child, how can we use the learning environment to give that child what they need, so that rather than taking the child out of the environment to do an intervention, the intervention opportunities are already there within my learning environment, and my team kind of know what they are, know what that child needs, and then can almost like bring the intervention to the child. And then the last one, which would be the last session and the last layer of practice that we will consider, will be our more focused activities. And obviously for the much younger children, our interactions and our targeted use of the learning environment will be the main layers of our practice. But obviously as children get a bit older, we might kind of bring them together to share stories, to do some little group work, to sing songs and rhymes. So we can look at how we can create specific skill opportunities within those groups and kind of what strategies are useful within those group activities to kind of move children on. And occasionally, where a child needs to go right back, it might be that you want to do a focus activity with an individual child or just a couple of children. And Launchpad can say, oh, well, we'll work on this with these children and we'll use the bubbles, or we'll use the click clack track, or we'll use these resources to work on that skill, but we will do it within the learning environment, but we'll do it specifically with this group of children or with these couple of children. And you know, and so Launchpad can be used to plan little activities, but the reason it's different from something like I Can Early Talk Boost is because those activities will match what you know those children need at that moment in time. And you'll also be using stuff from your learning environment so that the children will be familiar with the resources, they'll be familiar with the vocabulary, and later on those resources will go back into the setting. So you've got much more chances of you generalizing that progress, transferring that progress into the bigger environment. And also it's just part of your teaching. It's not an isolated intervention. It's just how you're working with those children at that moment in time. So those three kind of layers of practice will be looked at through the CPD that together I will be offering with the early years team, Beth and Leanne from Newcastle Local Authority. And I have to mention it, but all of this has come about and all of this will be funded by the North of the Tyne Combined Authority, who are also working in partnership, not just with me, but with the local authority. So it's a really lovely project because it really is bringing lots of things together and people working in partnership, and also people who have got some money are able to give us some money, which is always a good thing. But on top of that, as well as having that CPD, of course, if you sign up, you will be given a Launchpad toolkit to support you, to support your children. And I just want to tell you a little bit more about, very quickly, about what you will get. But I don't want us to get too bogged down by this, because the important thing to remember is the toolkit is a toolkit. And in schools, in Key Stage 1, for example, some people use the toolkit in Year 1 with children who know their letters but can't blend their letters. So they can go k, a, t, but they can't read the word cat. And you know, and in Key Stage 1, teachers might use the toolkit to find out why that child can't blend and to understand what they need to do with that child to move that child on. So the toolkit is fairly big and it can be used in different ways by different people for different things and at different ages. So when you get the toolkit, the first thing to remember is you are not expected to use it all. You are not expected to read it all. You are not expected to watch all the CPD. The idea is that we will use it to look at those children who are not meeting age-related expectations, to support you, to support those children. And then you can dip in and out of the toolkit to help you with that, but then just ignore the other bits. So that's the kind of first and foremost thing to say. And that the whole toolkit is underpinned by the Launchpad skills framework. And if you come on board, you will get this as a big A1 poster that can go either in one of your setting room, one of your provision rooms, or it can go in an office space. That is up to you. Ultimately, the skills framework is for you and your team. And it's a big developmental grid. That's all it is. And it is what allows people to understand what the different skills are, incrementally how they develop. And it's the skills framework that allows us to identify those gaps, to go back, establish what a child can do, and to set next steps. But again, we will talk more about that in detail if you come on board. You'll also get handbooks to go with those skills, some hard copy ones, some PDFs. Some of them are available in the online area, but again, some general information to help you and your team understand a little bit more about different skills, and some basic good practice kind of information about those skills. You will also be given a CPD index, which at the moment is a Excel spreadsheet, which has got different pages and there's titles of different recordings and different courses, and then a link that you click on to kind of watch the recording with a description of what is the content of that recording. And I would say straight away that the page that you will want to go to will most likely be the early language, speech, language and communication page. But even on there, there's quite a lot of content, how to support early communication, how to build vocabulary. You know, you don't kind of think, oh, I've got to go in and watch all of that before I start. What you do is you start with the skills framework, you start with the children, Then when you've got an idea, oh, I've actually got a lot of children who need support with vocabulary, maybe I'll watch the vocabulary CPD, and then maybe I'll just watch it and then disseminate, or maybe we'll watch a little bit as a team and then pause it and talk a bit about it and then watch a little bit more next week. Or maybe I'll direct another member of my team who particularly works with that group of children. Oh, actually, I think this would be a really useful one for you to watch. So again, you have that as a resource, but again, it's to dip in and out of, and it's to support you to support the children with their needs. It's that pick and mix kind of idea. You will also get login details, which will allow you to get into the login area of the Launchpad for Literacy website. And again, there's a whole host of supporting documentation over there. Again, with that pick and mix mentality, it's not about reading everything, using everything. And the main folder that you would probably go into, I would imagine, would be the skill information folder, so that when you have got a child or a group of children who need to work on a certain skill, and you're thinking, okay, we do this, we do that already, okay, but I wonder what else we could do. Then you can go into that skill information folder, as well as watching some of the CPD, to get some kind of more information and some more ideas. Now, obviously, we've talked about the way that we would like you to use it to support those children who are not meeting age-related expectations. But obviously, Launchpad would also help you to work with outside agencies, because for some of those children, they will already be known to outside agencies, or they will need to be referred to outside agencies once their issues become apparent. And Launchpad will really complement that. It's not about preventing children from being referred, but what it is about is it's about supporting you and supporting that process. So where you are referring children, Launchpad would really support you to make those referrals, you know, make it really clear about what you felt a child's skills strengths were, what they found tricky. Maybe if that outside agency is saying, I want evidence that you've put things in place first before you refer, then Launchpad again would say, you know, over the past 6 weeks, for example, we've identified that the child needs this, we've done this, we've done that, and the child has made some progress, but we're still really concerned. So at this point, we're putting in a referral. And of course, when that child does get seen and assessed, then ideally Launchpad could be that kind of framework to support those discussions and give you a cohesive framework to think about where, you know, what were a child's strengths, what is the main thing that they need working on, and what would be the next step that the outside agency, the specialist, would recommend. So if they've pinpointed for you to work on something within the Launchpad skills framework, the Launchpad toolkit would then give you CPD and ideas of, well, what would that look like if we were going to weave that into our practice? But where children do need referred, I think the important thing is that it enables you to act now. You know, you do put in that referral, but you have a greater sense yourself about what the child's gaps are and what that child needs. You know, it really empowers you and your team, and kind of, it takes away that kind of notion of we need to wait and see what they say is wrong, and we need to wait and see what they tell us to do. Of course, we're going to wait and listen to their advice when we get it. But if there are long waiting lists, then Launchpad will give me that kind of greater confidence and empower me and my team to say, I think we need to be working on with this, and we can be working on this with this child. As of now, we don't need to wait for that assessment findings and feedback. And I also think that's about children who do need referring and who do need to be known to outside agencies. But we've got more children who are not meeting age-related expectations than that. Many settings will say that they've got 50% of children who are not meeting age-related expectations with speech, language and communication. We're not going to refer 50% of our children, and speech and language therapy and other services would be horrified if we did. So we refer our priorities, those children with really significant needs, those children who are not making progress, those children with disordered patterns of unusual development. But we've got also a big number, probably, of children who are not meeting age-related expectations, but who are not going to refer because they do not meet referral criteria. So Launchpad is about empowering you with those children, because those children have got skill gaps which need identifying, which need addressing, because if not, that's going to have a long-term impact on those children. But the only people who are going to do that is you. No outside agency is going to support you with that one, because the gaps aren't significant enough for those children. They're not a clinical or an outside agency concern, but they will become an educational concern if those gaps are left unaddressed. And also as well, we all know children, don't we, who might have been referred to speech and language therapy when they were little, because maybe they didn't have any first words until, you know, they were like 30 months or 26 months. But they've made lots of really good progress, probably mainly because they've been in your setting, to be honest. And they get to the point where the therapist is less concerned with them because they're making progress. And so they get discharged from that service because they're no longer a clinical concern. But that child is still not yet meeting age-related expectations and still has gaps. So at that point, it's really important that just because they've been discharged, it doesn't mean that they don't still have some speech, language and communication gaps and needs, but that Launchpad would allow us and empower us to come in and support those children. So moving forwards, if you were to kind of come on board, then of course you get the Launchpad toolkit. And woven into that, you know, you can email me. There will be CPD opportunities, not just from me, but other members of the Launchpad team over the next couple of years because of the North of Tyne Combined Authority. You will have the Launchpad CPD opportunities in the same way as Launchpad users in Derby and Stoke. So you'll have the index. You'll also be able to access other Launchpad CPD opportunities that aren't Newcastle specific, so you can dip in and out of all that. But with Newcastle Local Authority, we will begin this process by offering those 3 very specific CPD sessions targeted at Newcastle settings, where we walk you through things to consider within those 3 layers of practice: that interaction, targeted use of the learning environment, focused activities. We will be trying to really bring speech and language therapy into this kind of mix. Now we've got a lot more schools and settings being involved. Certainly in other areas where Launchpad is used really quite prevalently, speech and language therapy really come on board and really love the idea of Launchpad, because it's child development and it's about good practice. So, you know, we will be working with the Newcastle Speech and Language Therapy team to kind of get them on board and to support us with this as much as possible. And again, there are existing Launchpad users in the Northeast already, where we can maybe kind of link in with those through North of the Tyne Combined Authority networks. But also when I share information, I will often do things like share quotes from people who have used Launchpad for a while, for example, and it just gives you an idea about how they've used it and the impact that it has had. But more importantly, if we've got a lovely number of settings in Newcastle, beginning at the same time and beginning this learning CPD upskilling journey at the same time, we've got the capability of having, even just within Newcastle, a really lovely little kind of support network with that local authority kind of support as well, so that we can all support children and upskill ourselves and learn together. That's the idea. So I'm going to try and come out of this now, and I'm going to try and find you all again, because at the minute my Teams is hidden. And we will possibly stop the recording. Is that right?
Yes, just give me a second, see if we can stop that.